Former half-term Alaska governor and Republican vice presidential nominee Sarah Palin can officially add a third line to her foreign policy resume tonight. Underneath own house's proximity to Russia and met the president of Colombia that one time, she can now list gave a speech in Hong Kong. A couple of things to know about this speech, which was delivered to a room full of financial executives at an investors forum. First, the speech was closed to the press. However, we do have some appropriately grainy and shaky footage from somebody's handy cam.
I'm going to call it like I see it, and I will share with you candidly a view kind of from Main Street USA, and how perhaps my view of Main Street, representing perhaps a lot of other people, how that affects you, your business.
Second interesting thing about this speech, Sarah Palin brought along as her advisor Randy Schooneman, the controversial top foreign policy advisor from the McCain-Palin campaign. Mr. Schooneman made himself famous for, at least famous for D.C. at least, when it turned out that his lobbying firm signed a new contract with the Republic of Georgia on the same day that John McCain, the candidate for president, spoke to the president of Georgia and released a statement supporting Georgia in what was about to become Georgia's armed conflict with Russia. The implication was that Georgia paid McCain's advisor. McCain's advisor later got McCain to say, "We are all Georgians," and therefore, for the low price of Randy Schooneman's company's lobbying fee, Georgia almost bought the U.S. military as an ally in a war against Russia. That's cheap. And Randy Schooneman is who Sarah Palin brought on board to help her navigate foreign policy in her first speech abroad. In the speech, which went on for a solid hour and a half before the question period, Sarah Palin argued that the economic crisis that we're in right now was caused by too much regulation of the financial world. Not a typo. Too much regulation. Quote, "We got into this mess because of government interference in the first place. Lack of government wasn't the problem. Government policies were the problem. The marketplace didn't fail. It became exactly as common sense would expect it to. The government ordered the loosening of lending standards. The Federal Reserve kept interest rates low. The government forced lending institutions to give loans to people who couldn't afford them. That's how we got into this mess." Really? And so the solution, presumably, is less regulation for Wall Street going forward? I do not mean to demean the former governor's economic bona fides, but we do have an opportunity here to get a second opinion on this from the man who won the Nobel Prize in economics. Joining us now is Paul Krugman, New York Times columnist, economics professor at Princeton, and, of course, Nobel laureate. His totally readable, totally worth it, updated book, The Return of Depression Economics and the Crisis of 2008, is now out in paperback. Paul, thanks for coming back on the show.
Hi there.
I know Sarah Palin isn't the most relevant topic, but I got to ask you. Too much government interference in the markets?
May I say first, an hour and a half?
90 solid minutes before questions.
God.
I know.
That's half a Castro. Anyway.
Is that what caused the financial crisis?
Hour and a half speeches, maybe. You know, the funny thing is that Governor Palin is not that far out of the Republican mainstream. I'm actually not sure she's out of it at all on this. There are a lot of people who, insist. We know government is bad. We know private sector is good, so it must have been government that caused the crisis. And the absence of any facts that actually sort of go in accord with that point of view don't seem to matter. I mean, of course, the way to think about it is that we had a pretty tightly regulated banking sector from FDR up until Ronald Reagan. And number of financial crises during that period, zero.
Yeah.
Then we had Reagan deregulation, savings and loan crisis, further deregulation, East Asian financial crisis, and even more deregulation, and, well, here we are. So, yeah, it's a pretty amazing point of view for anyone to be holding, but a lot of people do hold it.
Well, you say the return of depression economics is not just about how we got into this problem. Right. It's also about sort of how to get out. You say in the book that even if there are some tiny green shoots of good news out there right now, we are still living in a world in which the usual rules of economic policy don't apply. We're living in a world, you say, governed by depression economics. What did the Depression teach economists about how to get out of one or avoid one?
Well, it told us a lot about how to avoid one, which is that you really have to put some constraints. I mean, put it roughly, banking is very useful but extremely dangerous. and banks have to have all kinds of fencing put around as a protection. They have to have some guarantees so that we don't have bank runs, so people know their money is safe, but then they also have to have regulation so that bankers don't take huge risks with other people's money on a heads I win, tails you lose basis. We forgot all of that. The short line about how we got into this crisis is we forgot what our grandfathers learned at great expense. Getting out of, now that we're in the mess, that's much harder. I mean, the last time we got out of it with a world war, which is not something we hope to repeat.
So a world war that wasn't as a war useful, it was useful because it was a huge economic outlay by government.
That's right. It was an enormous fiscal stimulus. It was, we're getting all worked up about Obama, who will be spending at max about 2.5% of gross domestic product. World War II, of course, was more than 40% of gross domestic product at its peak. So this is trivial stuff that we're doing now. Luckily, it's not confronting a Great Depression, but I get depressed sometimes about depression because the lesson of the depression seems to be that getting out of this sort of thing requires efforts on a scale that's outside the realm of what's politically discussable right now.
Do you think that because there are some green shoots of economic recovery right now, that further government action is even less likely? That the worse things are, the more political possibility there is? Yeah,
there's a certain sense. There's the Rahm Emanuel line, and you never let a crisis go to waste. But it's starting to look like we did, and now things are not good. Unemployment is high, it's still rising, but the sense that we got to act because otherwise the world might end is fading away, and that makes it very hard to do stuff.
One piece of the recovery effort, but also the re-regulation effort that we've tried to focus on in this show is consumer protection.
Yeah.
The president proposing new federal agency to regulate consumer financial products, things like credit cards and mortgages and all these other things that a lot of normal Americans have. Do you think those proposals are smart, and do they go far enough?
Oh, they're smart, and they go far enough on that dimension. But that's actually one of the smaller pieces of it. I mean, much more important is regulating the amount of capital that banks have to hold on hand and regulating the way bankers get paid. The consumer protection ought to be the no-brainer, simple thing. How could anybody object? Of course they are. So that's the reason consumer protection has become a touchstone here is because if we can't even do that, what chance do we have of actually fixing the bigger things?
It's the regulatory equivalent of, voting in favor of mom and apple pie. The more complicated stuff shouldn't be.
That's right.
That much further down the road. Paul Krugman, Nobel Prize-winning economist, New York Times columnist, thank you very much for your time. It's nice to see you. And I should also say that The Return of Depression Economics and the Crisis of 2008 is out now in paperback. My personal recommendation, if you're watching the show, is that you should probably read it. It's very short, and I think you will thank me for the recommendation. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.